Hi, everybody. Welcome to A Mirror Darkly, Unbridled Inquiry. Today we have quite an interesting topic. It's hard to remember all the words. Intersectionality, critical race theory, and the one verse. So
Right.
should be an interesting discussion. Um, just so you guys know that we run the show in segments. So every 10 minutes we'll stop and read comments and questions. So please put those things in the comments to let us know if you have any questions or what you're thinking. If you do happen to come up with a topic, we're always willing to do show topics from our audience. This was actually a topic that I thought of after having watched some things about intersectionality and learning a little bit more about critical race theory, and it's been in the news lately. So I think it's important that we're aware of what it is and how it relates to those of us who are believers. So anyway, we really encourage discussion and questions and things like that. So feel free to do that. And I think that's
Think that covers it?
I think that covers it. So, okay,
Okay.
educate us.
Yeah, we'll give it a shot anyway. Um, Intersectionality is a theoretical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities, that is, their gender, their sex, their race, their class, their sexuality, their religion, disabilities, physical appearance, height, and so on. The list is almost
Wait.
endless.
Not wait, like WAIT, but WEIGHT? Like if you're fat, does that give you a special? Oh, yes. I have two now. I'm a woman and I'm fat.
Anyway, these combine to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege, according to the practitioners of this way of looking at things. That is, when you see a person, you have to think in terms of their relationship to power structures. And so so there are different things that you can have or be that will impact what your social standing happens to be. So if you're female, that puts you down a notch. Mm-hmm. If you're female and black, that puts you down a notch. If you're female, black, and
lesbian,
that you're down a notch. Transgender, so on. Disabled, some unfavored religion.
but it's kind of an inverse thing because the farther down you are, the more grievance you have, but that gives you more like street cred with them.
Right.
People that believe in intersectionality,
Well,
not intersexuality.
Yeah.
The farther down you are, the more cred you have.
Yeah. The thing is, though, what intersectionality attempted to do is to point out that an individual can be discriminated for more than one thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and the intersectionality as an analytic framework developed in the late 20th century and identifies how interlocking systems of power affect those who are marginalized in society, and takes these relationships into account in working to promote social and political equity. Intersectionality opposes analytical systems that treat each oppressive factor in isolation, as if the discrimination against black women could be explained away as only a simple sum of the discrimination against black men and the discrimination against white women. Intersectionality engages in similar themes as triple oppression, which is the oppression associated with being a poor and or immigrant woman of color. It grows out of the term was coined by black feminist scholar Kimberly Williams Crenshaw in 1989. And the theory began as an exploration of the oppression of women of color within society, but today the analysis is expanded to include many more aspects of social identities most commonly referenced in the fourth wave of feminism, including race, gender, sex, sexuality, class, ability, nationality, citizenship, religion, and body type. The concept grows out of feminism originally. Mm-hmm. And you see, and it's not something that necessarily began in 1989. Sojourner Truth back in what was it, 50 something. She did a speech called "Am I Not a Woman?" And her speech, to some extent, deals with some of these sorts of issues. That is, being a woman is one thing, but then she's also black and came out of slavery and all of that, and so that compounds the problems that she faces and the obstacles she faced in getting anywhere in society. Now, the fundamental purpose of intersectionality is to try to figure out ways of fixing the problem, although the reality is it seems more a way of categorizing people. And that's part of the another aspect of the criticism we'll get into. This also has an impact on critical race theory, is that both things come out of postmodernism. They're both heavily influenced by Marxist thinking, and they are not overly concerned with, in fact, they're opposed to critical thinking, rationality, things that are associated with the Enlightenment.
So it's kind of more of a romantic age.
It's a romantic age concept. Postmodernism, to some extent,
did last week.
Yeah, postmodernism to some extent is a reaction against Enlightenment ideas. That is, the concepts of modernism, and it's really just a new way of thinking about what was the Romantic movement. And so, for instance, in both critical race theory as well as in intersectionality, narrative is very important. Power disparities, and see, everything that things like critical thinking, logic, that sort of thing are thought of as being things that belong to the power structures and
to the oppressors,
rather than being something objective. They don't really accept the concept of objectivity. That is, everything is narrative, storytelling, anecdotal.
So
it's not data driven. It's not.
So would they say that if you are a black female fat lesbian, that you are unable to have reason and logic, and because that belongs to the oppressor?
It belongs to the oppressors.
So
as part of what is oppressing.
It's very restrictive. So it's kind of oppressive to believe this thing.
Well, that's the problem with it, as I look at it. That is, it's focused on something that, yes, we need to think in terms of, the problems with racism, the problems of oppression, the problems of discriminating against people for whatever reason.
Right.
I'm not convinced that it actually achieves that goal in any way whatsoever, because all it seems to actually be doing is further marginalizing the people, making them feel more as victims, and making it seem almost impossible for them to ever overcome.
It's not very empowering.
It's not particularly empowering as far as I can see. It also is very divisive. And, well, let's look at, I want to talk about something from critical race theory, because both these things kind of go together. They tie into postmodernism, which is a new romantic movement, Marxism, which does come out of rational thinking, but it's got its own set of issues. Critical race theory, go ahead and give you a definition of that, as a theoretical framework in the social sciences that examines society and culture as they relate to categorizations of race, law, and power. It's developed out of postmodern philosophy. It's based on critical theory, social philosophy that argues that social problems are influenced and created by social structures and cultural assumptions rather than by individual and psychological factors. It began as a theoretical movement within American law schools in the mid to late 1980s. Let's see, where was it? Okay. Richard Delgado and Gene Stefanik have documented the following major themes as characteristic of work in critical race theory. A critique of liberalism, that is classical liberalism. Critical race theory scholars favor a more aggressive approach to social transformation as opposed to liberalism's more cautious approach. They have a race-conscious approach to transformation, rejecting liberal embrace of affirmative action. They reject color blindness. They reject role modeling of merit principle, and an approach that relies on more political organizing in contrast to liberalism's reliance on race-based remedies. Storytelling, counter-storytelling, naming one's own reality, the use of narrative to illuminate and explore experiences of racial oppression, revisionist interpretations of American civil rights law and progress, criticism of civil rights scholarship and anti-discrimination law, such as Brown versus Board of Education. One of CRT's founders, Demick Bell, argued that civil rights advocates for blacks coincided with the self-interest of white elitists. Likewise, Mary I. Dudziak performed...
They couldn't have simple names.
Yeah, well, you
simple
do the best you can. Performed extensive archival research in the U.S. Department of State and Department of Justice, including the correspondence of U.S. ambassadors abroad, and decided that U.S. civil rights legislation was not passed because people of color were discriminated against. Rather, it was enacted in order to improve the image of the United States in the eyes of third world countries that the U.S. needed as allies during the Cold War. Intersectional theory, of course, is part of critical race theory. The examination of race, sex, class, national origin, sexual orientation, and how their combination plays out in various settings, that is, how the needs of a Latina female are different from those of a black male, and whose needs are the ones promoted. Essentialism, reducing the experience of a category, gender, or race to the experience of one subgroup, white women or African Americans. In essence, all oppressed people share the commonality of oppression. However, such oppression varies by gender, class, race, and so on, and therefore the aims and strategies will differ for each of these groups. Non-white cultural nationalism and separatism, that is, black nationalist movement, segregation becomes a part of critical race theory, that is, these different groups have to remain separate from each other. Structural determinism, concept of white privilege, microaggressions, all of these things come out of critical race theory.
What I find interesting about it is that freedom is never talked about.
Well,
freedom is not talked about. It seems to be oppressive just in the rules.
Well, this is the difficulty that I have with it, is that it's incredibly complex, it's incredibly legalistic, it focuses, I would argue that the purposes of these things were positive. That is, they wanted to deal with problems that exist within human society. That is, people oppressing, taking advantage of, mistreating one another. And so this is an attempt to deal with that. The difficulty I have with it, again, is that it is postmodernist and therefore comes from a romantic standpoint. It rejects critical thinking, it rejects logic, it rejects
data,
it rejects science. It's just, it has, and see, the problem is, and this is one of the major criticisms of both of these movements, is that it ends up being essentially nonsense, because if you can't rationally argue for the point of view, then it's all just how I feel. And emotions are not necessarily, emotions simply are. That is, how you feel is how you feel, but it doesn't necessarily give you truth.
Right.
Of course, they reject the concept of objective truth.
And I think
they reject objectivity.
That's the thing I think is the critical
It's very subjective.
problem, is that some time ago in our society, we started not accepting objective truth. And it's like, well, that's your truth. That's
this
your
comes
reality.
out of postmodernism,
Right.
which I would argue is a form of, it's a reaction against rationality. That is, it's the same thing that we saw back in the 1800s, reaction against the Enlightenment, reaction against reason. We've got focus on feelings, and Luke, you know, how did he?
Luke, I am your
In
father?
in Star Trek or in Star Wars.
Luke Skywalker?
Luke Skywalker, when he
I was like, Luke, where did that come from?
when he's doing the run to destroy
Oh, uh-huh.
and he
Oh, yeah,
your
just
feelings.
feel the force or whatever.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
again, these concepts you see beginning in the 70s and certainly in the 80s. A lot of these, both critical race theory, intersectionality, grow out of the 80s and 90s to a large extent. And so the roots go back to the 70s or even the 60s.
It would be nice to find a happy medium where emotions are valued, but also so is rationality. Like, for example, if someone is delusional and they believe something happened to them, it's okay to accept that that is their reality. However, there is objective truth that it didn't happen.
Right.
And
And the idea of helping someone that is delusional is to help them get in touch with reality.
right, that objective
The
reality.
objective reality, that is to realize that, okay, this isn't real. It's like with our youngest daughter, and she'll have auditory and visual hallucinations because of her mental illness, and she understands that those are hallucinations, and so she'll ask, is this really there, or am I really hearing
But it
this?
took a long time to get her to that
to get her
point.
to that point.
Right. We have cameras outside our house and one inside our house just for that specific purpose. When she was afraid to be home alone because she said she heard noises, there were people talking and things like that, and we're like,
And
there's
she would
nobody.
see people outside.
Yeah, and people that were like that she felt were threatening to her. And so we started with the cameras, and one night I remember you were here at the church teaching a class and I was gone. And she said, Mom, there's people in the backyard. There's somebody in the backyard. I can hear them. And so I said, well, I'll turn the cameras on. And I let you know that she was having an episode. And I looked in the backyard. There was nothing out there. I checked the front yard on the cameras. There was nothing out there. And then I turned on the one in the family room. And I told her to sit. Our couch like makes part of the hallway. It's like the back of it comes out into the hallway. I told her to sit behind the couch where nobody from the window could see her if somebody was out there. And there's like a little wall there and the couch, and so she's not visible to anybody but to me on the camera. And I said, you stay there and Dad's on his way. And she did. She stayed there. It made her feel better. But she also, from that, realized that what she was hearing and seeing were not actually there. And just the fact that we could confirm for her that they weren't there. So she understands the objective truth that nobody was there, but we also understand her personal reality that they are in fact there, because it's as real to her as her lunch that that these things are happening. And she's had incidents in her past that we know for a fact didn't happen, but she believes they did, and because we don't have anything to give her that's objective reality, we just kind of let it go. We let her think that because it's not hurting anybody, and but it's just things that she thinks have happened.
Yeah.
So,
And so the problem with critical race theory, intersectionality, is not the attempt to solve real problems. That is, racism actually exists. People are discriminated against for, how they look, whether they're disabled or not, if they're female, if they're transgender, if they're gay. There is definitely discrimination that happens. People are mean to people that are different from them. The question, though, is whether or not these particular approaches, intersectionality and critical race theory, are they effective and are they reasonable? Well, at their basis, they're not reasonable. They come out of just the emotions, narrative, storytelling, my truth. It has little to do with objective reality. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with the actual data at work in this. For instance, there's a philosopher, He's written several books: The Language of Instinct, The Better Angels of Our Nature, and Enlightenment Now. His name is Steven Pinker. And not too long ago, in early July, a group of linguistics researchers published an open letter calling for the Linguistic Society of America to revoke the organization's distinguished fellow status from linguist and cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker. They claimed that some of his old tweets revealed his racist and sexist biases. Almost immediately, a group of established scholars leapt to his defense. The letter shows no familiarity with Pinker's work and takes statements out of context in a way that, with the merest checking, are seen to be represented duplicitously. Academics from across disciplinary and political spectrum join people with that in rebutting the letter, including linguist and reason contributor John McWhorter, leftist firebrand Noam Chomsky, and formal semantics pioneer Barbara Parley. And Pinker talks about this, and he thought the letter was rather an astonishing document. And he said, I think it's part of a larger mindset that does not see the world as having complex problems that we fail to understand and ought to try to understand better to diagnose and treat, but rather they see it as a kind of warfare between powerful elites and oppressed masses. Mm-hmm. This is where the Marxist thinking comes in. Because in Marxism, you have the oppressed classes and the oppressors. That is the rich versus the poor. And everything is thought in terms of a class struggle. And so you see this reflected in the thinking both in critical race theory as well as in intersectionality. And he says in the classic Marxist analysis, these would be economic classes, but they've been transformed to racial and sexual classes. In this mindset, analysis, debate, evidence are just tools, propaganda, exercised by those in power. What has to happen is not a deeper understanding of social problems, but rather a wresting of power from elites and redistributing it to the disenfranchised. And so both in race critical theory as well as in intersectionality, there's the thought that analysis, debate, evidence are just oppressors' tools that keep the man down. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, that's kind of weird. From Pinker's perspective, it's weird. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, see, the writers of the letter said, this is Pinker, somebody interviewing Pinker, and they say to him, the writers of this letter said that by challenging the claim that police are more likely to kill black people than to kill white people, you showed a willingness to dismiss and downplay racist violence regardless of any evidence. And then this is Pinker's response. That's completely wrong. It's an open question to what extent police are racially biased. As a social scientist, I consider it my responsibility to try to understand that in light of the facts. You're literally committing a logical blunder if you hold a belief that police are more likely to shoot unarmed African Americans and you don't count up all the police people shoot. That is by no means a denial of the existence of racism. There's a distinct question of whether African Americans are subject to more sublethal harassment, and I think your former colleague Radley Blacko wrote a very good summary for the Washington Post that shows there is evidence of racial discrimination, harassment, and manhandling and arrests. But when it comes to lethal incidents, the evidence suggests that there isn't. And then the interviewer says, I'm trying to get a sense from your point of view of why your critics would misread what you are doing. And he says there's a mindset that we evaluate what people mean based on whether the underlying idea is likely to be true or false. That we should use evidence in doing so, that all of us, in large part, start from a position of ignorance when dealing with social problems, and that the imperative is to understand their causes and therefore arrive at the best possible solutions. There's an alternative mindset in which the content of someone's statements and attempts to evaluate them with respect to evidence are beside the point. The imperative is not to examine ideas that may be true or false. is to maximize passion and solidarity, because the elites are already in a position of power and the downtrodden have only their own solidarity and emotional passion as countermeasures. Therefore, anything that undermines the passion and solidarity is harmful in the struggle. And it is a struggle. It's a kind of warfare that is zero-sum, and the imperative is to change the power balance.
Right.
And that's something that you see both with intersectionality and with critical race theory. It is all about power. That is, we are oppressed, you are powerful, we need to shift that.
And what I think is interesting, and we went way past the 10 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
But no, kind of people are popping in and out, but not sticking around.
Yeah.
And my cousin can't come, so he
Oh.
popped in to tell me he couldn't be here. So anyway, but I think that what's interesting is that earning something is not valued. Like,
Right.
okay, so let's take Will Smith, for example. Okay, he started out as, he and his best friend, doing rap and stuff like that. City kid, I don't know his whole story, but anyway, and he moves up to where he's a pretty powerful person in Hollywood. And he's black, and he was, well, I don't know how poor he was, but he certainly was, when he started out, was more poor than he is now. But so you kind of, so that would mean anybody who is in one of these groups, if they earned something, that doesn't count.
Right.
So that's unfortunate too, because people should, the lack of empowerment and the lack of satisfaction in what you've earned seems to be completely downplayed in these theories. And
Well, the concept of microaggression is an interesting one, because what that is, it's somebody inadvertently says something that makes you feel bad. And so that's just part of the, the man putting you down. And what I find interesting about it is that the person who is feeling aggressed against, it's based on their feelings about whatever the person says or does, whether that person is actually that way or not.
well,
And so the question I have is, why are you attributing malice to somebody else?
right.
See, there's a problem in the whole thought of that.
Well, in the sexual harassment issue in the workplace, they will tell you it's not what your intentions were; it was how the person received it.
Which means that you have no way of being good.
Right.
That is, you're always bad regardless, you're always guilty.
Right. So you can't joke around. I mean, to be honest, we could have had some pretty serious sexual harassment lawsuits in the early days of my school, because there was a lot of teasing. But it was teasing, and we knew that. We knew it wasn't serious. And it was in the power structure. But there was no like power structure.
You didn't think in those terms.
Right, we didn't think,
necessarily.
because we worked with each other, and we would joke, and it was never, the jokes were never within like a meeting, or if you had to have a serious talk with your supervisor, those jokes were never present. It was always in social situations, or like when we had food in the lounge or something like
humor
that.
The problem with humor in general is that humor is a risky thing, because either they'll fall flat, that is, they won't get the joke, or you end up accidentally hurting somebody's feelings.
Right.
Or it works.
Well,
those
like
are the three possibilities.
The insult comic that's been on
Yes.
AGT.
Right.
Perfect example. Like, you sit there and you wait to see how the judges are going to react, because he's insulting the judges. And you're like, ugh. Now, when Don Rickles used to do it when I was a kid, you just laughed because you knew he was just teasing people and nobody got offended.
Well, also
but people are so
the whole
thin-skinned.
concept of roasting someone. That is, this is something, I mean, these are forms of humor that to some extent have been eliminated by these kind of movements. That is, you can't tease, you can't make fun of, because people will take it as humor. And that's, of course, always the danger in humor, but still. These movements are trying to address actual problems.
Right.
That's the
And
fundamental thing.
they have failed
And I
miserably
think
in
they
that
have
attempt.
failed miserably
right.
in that attempt
Because all they do is they make the problem worse.
they tend to make the problem worse. They create more division. In fact, that's kind of the nature of intersectionality or critical race theory, is you're dividing people into various categories and then setting them up in a hierarchy situation.
Really good example. So there's a thing that's really popular to do at like retreats and business conferences and stuff. You have people stand in a row all in the same line. Everybody starts out even. You say, if you've ever had this happen to you, take a step back. If you've had this happen to you, take a step forward. And it really divides people, and it really probably grew out of this.
Yes, it probably did.
You know, and I mean, it's good to know the differences in people. It's good to know, like I said, it would be nice if there was a balance instead of this pendulum swing where it goes so far one way or the other. Like, you know, I recognize the fact that these things happen to you, but good for you for overcoming it and moving on, you know,
Yeah.
and making something of your life. And you know, and just because you're a white male doesn't mean that you hold all the power and like the world just
Although in
was
critical
throwing
race
things at
theory,
you.
that's the way they
Yeah.
view it. That is, they view that having the white skin means that you have ownership of that. And renters, that is, people who don't have white skin, can never
Renters?
Renters. They
I
can
did
never,
not hear. I did not know that word.
Yes, you cannot.
Because you don't own the skin,
You
you're
don't have-
renting it.
Well, you're renting your position. That is, you don't own the position.
Okay.
As you have the white skin, then you own the position.
Oh,
So white ends up
Interesting.
being always a bad thing.
right.
But see, again, in critical race theory, that doesn't matter because color blindness is a no-no and a bad thing. In fact, the whole civil rights movement becomes misguided.
Right.
Um,
And that's the thing too, and I said this to a parent in my class. So we're doing distance learning, and a lot of the parents think that and I thought this was the case too, till I learned it wasn't, that if you sit in front of a window that the lighting is better. Well, it's not. From the perspective of a camera, you're just silhouetted. So I have a lot of my kids sit in front of windows. Does not matter what color they are. I can't see them. They're silhouetted. So I had a little guy in my class who happens to be black. It's part of the story. His back was to the window, and I said to him, I said, can you move so you're not in front of the window? So like half of his camera was window and the other half was wall, but it makes the wall really dark, and anything that goes in front of the wall because of all the light coming through the window was really dark also, regardless of his color. So anyway, so I said to him, I said, if you can move your Chromebook a little bit so it's not facing the window, that way I can see you better. And his dad came in to help him move, and his dad made a comment about, I said he's silhouetted, and I said, and then he would disappear completely in front of the wall because the wall is completely dark and everything is dark that's in front of the wall because of the extra light from the window. And he goes, and it doesn't help that he has such dark skin. And I said, you can say that, I can't. And the dad laughed. And then I said, but I do believe it's the content of your character, not the color of your skin, like Dr. King said. He goes, I agree with you completely. But in intersectionality and critical race theory, that is not a concept.
No. It's
That
not
it's
acceptable.
not the content of your character. It is about the color of your skin. It is about who you sleep with. It is about all these things.
It's all about the external
And
things. Of
yes, and I find it appalling that Dr. King's legacy has fallen so hard amongst these people that should know better. These are people with college educations.
Well,
That's
the-
part of the problem.
Well, the
They're
problem,
in these universities
well,
that teach this stuff.
the problem is Marxist theory and postmodernism. That is the romantic concept and then the class struggle concept. And then taking the class struggle and then applying it to sexual differences, racial differences,
Right.
gender, who you sleep with differences, body type differences. Everything becomes this struggle. And it's sad. Again, it's motivated, there's a positive motivation for it, that is recognizing that there are issues and problems among human beings. And so this is a way of trying to analyze it and make sense of it. Unfortunately, it's a form of making sense of it that depends on rejecting all the tools that we have of being able to make sense of anything.
Right.
As it rejects critical thinking, logic, analysis, scientific method, all the things that have led to our civilization being what it is, but then they reject the nature of our civilization as being inherently oppressive and evil and needs to be torn down. It's just weird.
So what I think is interesting is that empowering people, which used to be a thing, is not a thing with these people. And I say these people in the sense that people that hold these theories to be true. But empowering people works. Like, you can be born poor or black or gay or whatever, and you can achieve things. I mean, one of the people running for the Democratic nomination was gay. Now, he was white. I guess that plays against him.
Yeah,
but he was gay. You had black women. You had a whole variety of people that had achieved something. They had achieved whatever their goals were up to that point. And that should be celebrated, and that should be empowering to people that are gay or black or whatever, Hispanic, whatever your thing is that you believe is holding you back. Right. And it should be empowering, like the whole concept of seeing yourself in a movie or whatever. I was watching, I don't remember what movie it was, but there was a black actress that said that I know it was the whole controversy over Gone with the Wind, when they wanted to cancel Gone with the Wind. And there was a black actress who said, and I can't remember for the life of me who it was, that when she saw Hattie McDaniel and the actress that played Prissy on there, that was the first time she had seen herself on film, that she had seen somebody that looked like her on film. And even though it's not historically accurate, and it never claimed to be, it's a romance. Piece of art, it's a romance, and it's not intended to be, it's not a documentary, and even, it allowed Hattie McDaniel to be the first black woman to win an Oscar. It brought her wealth and all that, and that people want to cancel that is, I think, preposterous.
Well, it goes...
But it allows people to identify with someone that has achieved something. So if you're a little Hispanic kid and you want to be a dentist, and then you read a book about a dentist who's Hispanic, or you go to the dentist office and there's Dr. Sanchez. I don't know. I'm trying not to be racist when I say this stuff. I'm trying not to be offensive, but you know what I mean. To see yourself in these positions of success, I think is really important. And to tear people down and to tear them apart, I think is a huge disservice to people. It's a huge disservice, and I know because we're white, we're not allowed to say it. It's a huge disservice to white people because we are not racist. I mean, there are some, I will give you that. There are racists in every facet of life. But I don't know. It just, to me, the tearing apart and the tearing down is wrong. And I think that's where the verse about loving people as you love yourself, that one critical verse in the Bible is so important. Now, of course, they will tell you that there is no God, there is no objective truth. The Bible isn't true. You can't just believe that it's true.
Well, the problem, though, with any postmodernist point of view is that because it fundamentally rejects reason, it becomes, by definition, nonsense. And how do you argue for something without using rational arguments?
Right.
It's a self-defeating way of looking at reality.
Right.
Because, and see, the weird thing is, people that hold to these different points of view, so far as the way they live their lives on a day-to-day basis, everything they do works against that. That is, they look both ways before they cross the street. They feel ill, they'll go to see a doctor. They look at their bank statement and they expect the money to be a certain way, and things add up or subtract the way
It's not like, well,
they live their lives.
I think I'm rich, even though my bank account's in the toilet.
Yeah.
I'm going to still go out and spend money. You can't
That
do that.
is, you live your life dependent on reason and rationality
And objective
and
truth.
objective truth. As if you reject objective truth entirely, then yeah, go ahead and cross streets without looking both ways. Go ahead and don't bother to worry about whether the light's red or green. It doesn't matter, and so on. It becomes nonsensical, and that's the fundamental problem with anything that grows out of postmodernism from my point of view. If you're rejecting Enlightenment concepts, you have gone into
You should be
Storyland.
consistent in every aspect of your life. So just do everything like how you feel about it. So if you think you're rich, go spend money you don't have. See how that works for you.
And from a Christian perspective, none of these things work. That is, the one verse, and see, the one verse is and people know what the solution is. What the world needs now is love, sweet love, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's the case. That is, love your neighbor as yourself is the core of what the biblical message is all about. That is, everything in the Bible comes down to that one concept. That is, Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, Jesus says, do to others as you'd have them do to you. This sums up the law and the prophets. That is, this sums up the entire Bible. That's what it's all about. Do to others you'd have them do to you. Likewise, another way of wording it is, say, love your neighbor as yourself. And again, Jesus says, like in Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 40, the whole Bible is summed up by that commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. Paul, both in Galatians and Romans, same statement is made that whatever commandments there may be, they're summed up in the one command, love your neighbor as yourself. The implications of this are interesting. You see it reflected in biblical passages, for instance, and this is counter to what you see in critical race theory or intersectionality, because Paul, for instance, in Galatians 3:28 writes, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. The concept, and this goes back to the very beginning of the biblical story, is that human beings are all one family. And there is no difference fundamentally between us. That is, we all have the same basic needs, wants, desires, hopes, dreams. We are human. And to look down on other people runs counter to the whole concept of do to others, you'd have them do to you. That is, it's like what Abraham Lincoln said back, a long time ago when he was talking about slavery. He said, if you would want to be a slave, that should tell you enough that all that you need to know about slavery is do to others, you'd have them do you. You don't want to be enslaved, so don't do that to somebody else. It's pretty simple. And then the whole hierarchy that is created in both critical race theory as well as in intersectionality also runs counter to the whole concept of do to others, you'd have them do to you. You have the interesting little story in Matthew chapter 20, and it's repeated in Mark chapter 10, verse 35 through 45. The mother of James and John, James and John get their mother to go to Jesus and ask him to, when you come into your kingdom, could, my sons be on your left hand and right hand? And Jesus uses this as a teaching opportunity. And he calls them together and said, this is at verse 25 in Matthew chapter 20, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And again, it's the whole concept of doing to others as you'd have them do to you. That is, you do not oppress other people. You do not try to become the boss of other people. Everybody is treated the same as the concept. And what you do as a human being is you try to serve other people. Now, if we lived in a world where do to others as you'd have them do to you was actually practiced, everybody would always be deliriously happy, because just as hard as you're trying to do for somebody else, they're trying to do for you. And so everybody is always being fulfilled and made happy and getting everything they want, because everybody is trying to do for everybody else. That is, you're never emptying yourself. You're always being filled then by somebody else as you're trying to pour all your stuff out into them.
Well, I think a really good picture of that is the old story about a guy had a vision of hell, and everybody in hell had one hand tied behind their back, and everybody had bowls of soup, and everybody had a spoon, but the spoon had a really long handle, so they couldn't feed themselves. And then he went to heaven, and in heaven, everybody had a hand behind their back, and they had a long spoon in their hand. It was identical to the hell picture, the hell vision, but they were feeding each other. So if you're constantly feeding each other, you're never hungry.
Right.
And I think that's where these two theories completely miss the boat.
Well, also the whole concept biblically is not to pay attention to the externals. That is, fat or thin, slave or free, male or female, black, white, yellow, red, whatever. Those are of no consequence.
Right. If I have a kid that can't read, I go, well, he's a black kid, figures. Or he's a white kid. What does he need to read? Because he's the oppressor. We won't teach the white kid to read. We'll just teach the black kids to read because they can't read. But no, I have a kid that can't read. I don't care what race he is. I just teach him to read, or her to read. I don't care what their gender is. I don't care what their race is. I don't care if they have two moms or
Those
two
things
dads
should
or
not
14
matter.
adults.
And so the focus, rather
Right.
than being on our differences, our focus should be on what makes us the same. That is,
Right.
we are all human
And how
beings.
can I help this
And how can I
person?
help this person?
Because there are some people that, because of their life circumstances, aren't in a good place.
Right.
And so what can I do to help this person?
And one of the things you see biblically, again, the whole concept of do to others, you'd have them do to you. If you look at the legal texts in the Old Testament, they focus an awful lot on taking care of those that are disadvantaged. In fact, if you look at the Old Testament prophets, there were two things that the prophets prophesied against. That is, they criticized the people for. One was worshiping idols, worshiping things that were other than Yahweh. And the other thing they criticized was oppressing the poor, taking advantage of people.
Widows and
Fatherless and all of that.
And, I want to address that widows thing, because we think of widows like when you're widowed young, you get a job, let's say you were a stay-at-home mom, you get a job, you get an education, you get a job, whatever, or, if you're older, your family takes care of you. Being a widow in biblical times was completely,
or the ancient world in general.
the ancient world, completely different than being a widow now. And
at least in the West. I mean, there's some parts of the world that's still
yeah,
that
in India,
way,
it
which
can
is
be pretty
weird.
bad. But I watched a show that Oprah actually did quite a few years ago, and you can do research on it. There's a city that's for widows. And so if you're for Indian widows, so if you live in India and your husband dies and your family doesn't want to take care of you, you're left to be a beggar in the street. You'll probably starve to death. But there's a city where widows go to live. So if you can make the trip to the city, you can live there. Well, there was women's groups that were coming into the city to teach the women how to make crafts and use the skills that they had as wives and mothers to be able to sell those things to make a living, because it was a horrible situation that these women were in. And I just finished a study on, the book is called The Gospel of Ruth, and it's fascinating. I actually want to get the book and really study more about it, because Ruth was an Arab woman, and I never associated being Moabite with being an Arab woman. And so it transforms your thinking. It's really visual, like, wow, okay, I know who she is now. And when her father-in-law died and then her husband died, her commitment to her mother-in-law was more than just, let's hang out because we enjoy each other's company. She was really, because Naomi was going to move back to where Naomi was from, back to Israel, to Bethlehem. And so she has this Arab daughter-in-law who they have nothing, because they have no husbands and Naomi has no sons. So they are completely destitute. And so Naomi's like, I'm going back to my family. You girls go off, find yourselves husbands. And Ruth is like, no, I'm going to stay with you. That was really kind of a death sentence, because she was going back to a place where only Jews were, and she was an Arab. And so she would be discriminated against just because of her ethnicity, and the fact that she had no husband. You can't own anything. It was interesting when I went to a night in Bethlehem at my sister's church. They reenact the night that Jesus was born, and they turn the courtyard of the church into Bethlehem. They've got animals there. You register for the census when you come in the gates. There's all different kinds of food, like Middle Eastern foods there.
You have to change your money to...
Yeah, you have to buy their little drachmas and stuff, or whatever they are. But anyway, there's Pharisees in front of the temple. And I'm standing there, and I'm just dressed. I mean, it was winter, so it was kind of cold. But, I'm dressed like I would normally in the winter, like pants and a jacket. And, I didn't have a head covering on. And so the Pharisees are like, where is your husband? Why are you out in town without a husband? Because now I'm a harlot. And I was dressed inappropriately. And they were just really ragging on me. It was bad. And it was funny because I understood that it was not serious. Mm-hmm. But I thought, man, if I was a woman in actual Bethlehem and these Pharisees were talking to me like that, that's actually kind of what these people are, the critical race theory people. They're Pharisees. But anyway.
Legalism is an aspect of the human condition.
Right.
That is, we love rules and laws and regulations.
Right.
And we glom onto that, and some of the earliest texts that have ever been written were laws. Mm-hmm. That's what the world system is. That is worldliness, rules, and regulations.
Yep. I mean, people think it's, running around naked and going to X-rated movies.
Yeah, that's not worldliness.
Sleeping with
worldliness
random women.
You find in the halls of Congress.
Yes.
And the legislature in Sacramento, and every aspect of our lives. Mm-hmm. You have rules.
Just
and
driving down the freeway.
You buy a product, and it gives you the rules for how to use it. And
driving down the freeway, there's a limit on your speed, whether you follow it or not. Uh-huh. There's lines on the road. You can't just drive willy-nilly sideways along the freeway.
You must follow the laws.
You can't drive on the wrong side of the freeway. You'll die, and so will the other people with you, or the other people around you. I mean, we follow rules because it comes naturally to us.
Yes, it does. We like rules.
Yes, we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
We actually hit the 10-minute mark, but
we got 5
so our
minutes.
friend Judy is here, and she said hi. She said bye, but then she's still there. So hi, Judy.
Well, she said hi, bye, hi, bye.
Yeah.
Hi. She keeps popping in and out.
Yeah.
Maybe she's having trouble with her connection.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so what time are we at? We have about.
We've got 5 minutes.
Okay. So I think that empowering people and loving people and serving others is a much better way to go. Mm-hmm. And not worrying about what color somebody is. If you see somebody that's being oppressed, help them out.
Yes, and don't oppress them yourself.
And it's so simple.
Again, just love other people.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the reason you have the entire Bible rather than just the one verse, to do to others as you'd have them do to you, or to love your neighbor as yourself, is because of our inherent legalism, because then they'll start asking the question, well, who is my neighbor? And we want to define it narrowly enough so that we can be mean to people that we don't like.
Right.
And see, we can't do that. That is, the rest of the Bible makes it clear that your neighbor means your enemy even. People that are nasty and unpleasant and put ketchup on.
Pray
eggs
for
and that sort of
those who despitefully use you.
Right.
If you can't do anything else, pray
And
for
again,
them.
that's something, see, this is the other thing that is missing from some of these theories, are the concepts of mercy, forgiveness. Well, mercy,
Grace.
forgiveness, grace, love do not seem to be parts of those theories particularly. It's more a power struggle. Well, again, coming out of Marxism, class struggle. That is, what is your position as matter of power? That is, I want to be in control, and everything is about being, and again, it runs counter to do to others you'd have them do to you, or what Jesus said about not lording it over other people. But as human beings, that's kind of what we want to do. We want to be boss. We want to make other people do what we want them to do, because, and this is part of our brokenness as human beings, is we love ourselves, we're not sure anybody else does. And so we've got to look out for number one. And
Yeah.
that's the source of so much that goes wrong in the world.
Yep. Oh, that was a pretty heavy topic, but I think it went
Yeah.
quite well. So what's the topic for next week?
Oh, that's what I was just looking at.
Okay, so you look at that, and I will talk about other stuff. So if you join us every Saturday at 4 o'clock. We're here every Saturday except for the Saturdays we're not. So if you follow the Mirror Darkly Facebook page, or go to our YouTube channel and subscribe and click the bell for notifications, you'll know when we're going to be on. We're here most of the time. October 3rd we won't be, because I'm going to be spending some time with my mom that day, so I won't be back in time. So October 3rd we're not having a show. But anyway, so we hope you'll join us. If you have any suggestions for topics, or if you have a question, like if you're not listening to this live and you listen to the recording of it, if you have any questions, just send an email to info@theology.edu, and we can bring it up on the next show.
Or leave a message on the Facebook
just
page,
comment on the
comment
Facebook
on
page.
yeah.
Or comment on the YouTube.
Right.
There's Dennis. He says, hi, tough subject matter, did well explaining, blessings from Sweden. Hey, Dennis. So, anyway, what was I going to say? If you're looking for a place to worship, Quartz Hill Community Church, we are here at 51st and Avenue K in Quartz Hill. If you
California.
in California. If you can't be here in person for whatever reason, like you live too far away, or because of COVID, you're staying in, you can join us on our live stream. We live stream on YouTube and on Facebook. So if you go to the Quartz Hill Community Church Facebook page, or to the YouTube channel, then you can catch us there. If you want to watch recordings of previous services, again, go to those same places, subscribe, hit the bell, follow, all those things. Like they say in all the YouTube videos, subscribe, notifications, down here, up there. They're always pointing, and they're never pointing in the right place. They
Well,
go,
it's hard to figure out.
I know. So
It's hard to remember.
I know. So,
Subscribe button is usually, I think, who knows?
it's down there.
It's down there somewhere.
And the
on
cards
YouTube.
are up there, but we don't use cards. So anyway,
And
we
Facebook
hope
is
to see
different
you next
entirely.
week for
The Unforgiving World.
kind of what we've been talking about. We talked about the Romantic era last week, talked about critical race theory and intersectionality this week, and the Unforgiving World next week, and then we will be off for October 3rd, and then we'll be back after that. So there is a schedule on the Mirror
I'll have to
Darkly
change
page.
that.
Yeah, he has to update it, but it pretty much under the announcements, it tells you what the schedule is. So
Yes, I try to keep it updated.
yeah, he'll scooch stuff down if we come up with the topic.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So you guys have a good one. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.